In the vast expanse of the Milky Way, countless worlds teemed with life, some flourishing, others crumbling under the weight of their ambitions. Yet, among all the treasures scattered across the galaxy, nothing was as coveted as the fabled Nexus Ring, a legendary artifact said to hold the power to bend the laws of reality itself. Its origin was unknown, its purpose a mystery, but the whispers that followed it spoke of civilizations rising and falling at its command. And now, after millennia of silence, the ring had resurfaced, not on an alien world, nor in the hands of a galactic conqueror, but hidden in plain sight on the finger of a human who had no idea of its true significance. Dr. Elena Carter had always thought of herself as ordinary. Well, ordinary by the standards of someone who had mapped rogue black holes by the age of 30 and published groundbreaking research on gravitational wave interference. She lived a quiet life, tucked away in a remote observatory, where she gazed at the stars and let the vastness of space fill the silence in her mind. The ring she wore, a simple band of interwoven silver and gold, was nothing more than an heirloom passed down by her grandmother, a piece of sentimental jewelry she rarely thought about. Until the day everything changed. It began with a sound, barely perceptible at first, a low hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Elena was in her lab, poring over a set of star charts, when the noise intensified, vibrating through the walls and into her very bones. She froze, her pencil slipping from her hand, as the hum became a deep, resonant pulse. Seismic activity, she muttered aloud, though she knew it couldn't be. Her observatory was built on one of the most geologically stable regions on Earth. Before she could investigate further, the lights flickered, dimmed, and then surged back to life with a cold, otherworldly glow. Her computer screen, previously displaying harmless data streams, now crackled with static. Words, no symbols, began to materialize on the screen, shimmering in a language she couldn't comprehend. Warning, Nexus artifact detected. Location compromised. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Nexus? Artifact? The words meant nothing to her, but the tone of the message, if a tone could be inferred from glowing text, radiated urgency. Then came the knocking. At first, it was gentle, as though someone was politely rapping on her reinforced steel door. But the knocks grew louder, more insistent, until they reverberated through the entire building. Elena's heart raced. The observatory was miles from civilization. No visitors, no neighbors, no one who could possibly be at the door. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling despite her efforts to steady it. No answer. The pounding intensified, and with it came a deep, guttural voice that seemed to bypass her ears and speak directly into her mind. Surrender the Nexus. Elena's blood turned to ice. She stumbled backward, her gaze darting to the security monitors. What she saw sent a jolt of terror through her. Standing outside her observatory was a figure. No, several figures, wrapped in armor that gleamed like liquid obsidian. Their eyes glowed an unnatural blue, and their limbs moved with an unsettling fluidity, as though they were unbound by the constraints of muscle and bone. One of them stepped closer to the camera, tilting its head as if it could see her through the screen. "You have something that belongs to us," it said, the words reverberating in her skull. Elena's hand instinctively went to the ring on her finger. It was absurd. How could they be talking about this? It was just an old piece of jewelry, worn smooth by years of use. Yet as her fingers brushed against the metal, she felt a warmth that hadn't been there before, a faint pulse that seemed to sync with the beating of her heart. "Identify yourself," she demanded, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. The creature didn't answer. Instead, it raised an arm, and a beam of searing light shot from its wrist, melting through the steel door as though it were butter. Elena's survival instincts kicked in. She grabbed her laptop, a few crucial tools, and bolted toward the emergency exit. Her mind raced as she sprinted into the cold, moonlit night, the echoes of the intruder's pursuit close behind. What did they want? Why was this happening? And what, in the name of all that was rational, did her ring have to do with any of it? As she ran, she glanced at the ring again, the faint pulse now stronger, more insistent. It was as if the artifact itself was alive, reacting to her fear, her urgency. "Activate," a voice whispered, not her own but something ancient, distant, and yet undeniably present. Without understanding why, she whispered back, "How?" The ring responded. A wave of energy surged outward, shimmering like liquid starlight, and for a brief moment time itself seemed to slow. The creatures behind her faltered, their movements sluggish and disoriented. Elena didn't stop to marvel at what she'd just done. She kept running, her breath ragged, her mind a whirlwind of questions. Somewhere, deep in the recesses of her consciousness, she understood one thing. Her life would never be ordinary again. Unbeknownst to her, the activation of the ring sent a signal, one that echoed far beyond Earth, reaching the ears of beings who had waited centuries for this moment. Factions across the galaxy turned their attention toward the tiny blue planet, each driven by the same singular desire. The hunt for the Nexus ring had begun, and Elena Carter was at its center. The ring pulsed again, sending another invisible shockwave rippling through the night. Somewhere in the distance, Elena heard the roar of engines, a sound not meant for Earth. She crouched low behind a cluster of boulders, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Her heart pounded against her ribs, each beat reminding her that she had no idea how to fight aliens, escape high-tech hunters, or survive whatever the ring had just dragged her into. Her hand trembled as she examined the band. It still looked like the same simple heirloom, but now it hummed with energy, faint golden circuits illuminating its surface like veins of molten light. She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions pressing down on her. Behind her, the alien figures emerged from the darkness. They moved in eerie synchronization, their glowing eyes scanning the terrain like predatory drones. Their footsteps crunched against the gravel as they spoke in guttural tones she couldn't understand. Yet somehow she felt the malice in every syllable. Find the human. The Nexus must not remain dormant. Elena pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her pulse hammering in her ears. She didn't need a translation to know they were hunting her. Suddenly the air vibrated with the whine of an approaching ship. She peeked out from her hiding spot and froze. Hovering just above the treetops was an enormous vessel, its sleek black hull shimmering with alien glyphs that seemed to shift and writhe like living tattoos. Spotlights scanned the ground, slicing through the darkness as they searched for her. "Okay, Elena," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the rising panic. "Think. You're a scientist. You solve problems. What's the plan?" Her mind raced through the possibilities. She could try to run again, but she'd barely escaped the first time, and these creatures were faster, stronger, and armed with technology far beyond anything she could comprehend. Her eyes darted to the ring. It had reacted to her earlier. Could it do more? "Activate," she whispered again, but this time nothing happened. She clenched her fists in frustration. "What do you want from me?" she hissed at the ring. As if in response, a voice echoed in her mind, a voice that was neither human nor alien, but something ancient and vast. "Protect the Nexus. Trust your instincts." She didn't have time to process the cryptic message. The spotlight swung dangerously close to her position, forcing her to dive into a dry creek bed. The aliens above barked commands, their movements growing more frantic as they closed in. Just when it seemed the light would find her, a deafening roar split the night. A blinding streak of fire shot through the sky, striking the hovering ship with a force that rattled the ground beneath her. The vessel lurched sideways, its shields flickering under the impact. "What now?" Elena muttered, peeking out cautiously. From the smoke and chaos emerged a smaller ship, its design sleeker and more angular, like a falcon poised mid-dive. It unleashed another volley, forcing the alien vessel to retreat into the clouds. Before she could decide whether to feel relieved or terrified, the smaller ship descended, landing just a few meters away. The hatch hissed open and a figure stepped out, humanoid but undeniably alien. The newcomer was tall and lean, with skin that shimmered like polished quartz. Its eyes glowed a soft lavender, radiating an odd mixture of intelligence and urgency. It wore a suit of intricate armor that pulsed faintly with light, mirroring the patterns on Elena's ring. "Elena Carter," it said in flawless English, its voice calm but commanding. "You must come with me if you wish to survive." What are you?" she stammered, stumbling back as it approached. I am Kaylee's, it replied, extending a hand. Protector of the Nexus. And you are its keeper. Keeper? Elena shook her head. There's been a mistake. I'm just a scientist. I don't know anything about this Nexus or why everyone is trying to kill me. Kaylee's glanced at the ring on her finger, his expression unreadable. You may not understand it yet, but the ring has chosen you. It is the key to balancing the forces of the galaxy. And now, every power-hungry faction in the universe will stop at nothing to take it from you. Elena's stomach dropped. So what? I'm just supposed to trust you? How do I know you're not one of them? Kaylee stepped closer, his gaze steady. If I were, you'd already be dead. Before she could respond, the ground shook violently, and a piercing shriek filled the air. The alien hunters had regrouped, and this time they weren't alone. Strange, insect-like creatures crawled out of the forest, their exoskeletons gleaming under the moonlight. We don't have time for this, Kaylee said, drawing a weapon from his side. It hummed with energy, casting a faint glow that seemed to repel the advancing creatures. You can ask your questions later. Right now we need to move. Elena hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to run in the opposite direction. But then the ring pulsed again, stronger this time, almost guiding her toward Kaylee's. Fine, she muttered, grabbing his outstretched hand. But if this gets me killed, I'm blaming you. Kaylee smirked, a flicker of amusement breaking through his stoic demeanor. Deal? As they sprinted toward the ship, the creatures closed in, their shrieks growing louder with every step. Kaylee's fired his weapon, each shot landing with pinpoint accuracy. The blast sent the creatures sprawling, but more emerged from the shadows, their numbers overwhelming. Elena, hold on to me, Kaylee's ordered as they reached the ship. The ramp retracted just as the first of the creatures lunged at them. Kaylee's threw up a shimmering barrier, blocking the attack and sending the creature crashing into the dirt. The ship's engines roared to life, and they shot into the sky, leaving the chaos behind. Elena slumped into a seat, her chest heaving as she tried to process everything. This isn't over, Kaylee said, his tone grim. The hunters won't stop until they have the Nexus. You're the only one who can keep it safe. Elena looked at him, then at the ring, its golden circuits glowing softly in the dim light of the cabin. She didn't understand what was happening or why she'd been chosen, but one thing was clear, her life would never be the same again. And somewhere in the far reaches of space, the true enemy waited, watching. The silence in the ship was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of its engines. Elena stared out of the viewport, watching the stars blur as they hurtled through space. She couldn't help but think about the life she'd left behind, now a faint shadow in the rearview of her mind. Her world was gone, ripped away by a ring she barely understood. Why me? She muttered to no one in particular, clutching her hand and the glowing band that had upended her life. Because you are the only one who can wield it? Kaylee's voice cut through the quiet, startling her. She turned to face him. That's not an answer. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't ask for any of this. Kaylee's leaned against the control panel, his sharp, glowing eyes fixed on her. Do you think anyone chooses this burden willingly? The Nexus doesn't pick at random. It finds those who are compatible. Compatible, she repeated bitterly. Great. Just what I needed. A cosmic dating app with galactic warlords as my suitors? Kaylee smirked faintly, but the weight of his words hung heavy between them. Before Elena could press him further, an alert blared from the console. Kaylee's moved quickly, his fingers dancing over holographic controls. What now? Elena asked, her voice tinged with exhaustion. They found us. Kaylee's tone was calm but laced with urgency. They? Who's they this time? Kaylee's didn't answer immediately. Instead, he brought up a display on the ship's screen. Elena's breath caught as a fleet of alien ships appeared, cutting through the void like predators closing in on their prey. These aren't the hunters from earlier, Kaylee said. This is the Syndicate. They control half the galaxy and they've been hunting the Nexus for centuries. And now they're hunting me, Elena whispered. Kaylee's nodded grimly. You're the keeper now. That makes you the target? Elena slumped back in her seat, the weight of his words pressing down on her. So what's the plan? You've clearly been at this longer than I have. Kaylee's hesitated, his gaze shifting to the ring on her finger. The nexus holds the coordinates to its true location. Right now the ring is acting as a conduit. It's bound to you, but its full power is dormant. We need to awaken it before they catch us. And how exactly do we do that? Elena asked. Kaylee's expression darkened. The nexus is hidden on a planet deep in the Helios expanse, but the journey won't be easy. The closer we get, the more enemies we'll attract. Every faction in the galaxy will be coming for us. As if on cue, the ship shuddered violently, throwing Elena against the console. Alarms blared as the Syndicate's ships opened fire, their weapons lighting up the darkness of space. Hold on. Kaylee shouted, gripping the controls. The ship banked sharply, narrowly avoiding a volley of plasma bolts. Elena's stomach lurched as they dove into a dense asteroid field, the debris hurtling past them like jagged teeth. This is insane, she yelled, clinging to her seat. It's the only way to lose them, Kaylee's replied, his hand steady on the controls. The Syndicate ships followed, their sleek designs allowing them to navigate the asteroids with ease. Kaylee's fired back, the ship's weapons cutting through the closest pursuers, but more kept coming. Elena's mind raced. She couldn't just sit there and watch. The ring had reacted to her before, maybe it could help now. She closed her eyes, focusing on the warmth of the band against her skin. Come on, she whispered. Do something. At first nothing happened. But then a surge of energy coursed through her, and the ring began to glow brighter. Symbols appeared on its surface, shifting and rearranging themselves into a pattern she couldn't understand. Elena, what are you doing? Kaylee's demanded, glancing at her. I don't know, she shouted back, the energy building around her. Suddenly, a beam of light shot from the ring, piercing through the hull of the ship and into the asteroid field. The Syndicate ships hesitated, their movements faltering as if the beam disrupted their systems. Kaylee seized the opportunity, weaving through the asteroids with renewed vigor. The Syndicate ships collided with the debris, their formations breaking apart as they scrambled to recover. What was that? Kaylee's asked once they were clear of the field. Elena stared at the ring, her hands trembling. I think it was me. Kaylee's expression softened, a rare glimmer of approval in his eyes. You're starting to awaken the nexus. But this is only the beginning. Beginning of what? Elena asked, her voice shaking. Kaylee sat back, his gaze fixed on the distant stars. The nexus is more than a weapon or a key. It's a source of balance, a force that binds the galaxy together. If it falls into the wrong hands, it could unravel everything. Elena swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling over her. She hadn't asked for this, but now it was her reality. So what do we do now? She asked. Kaylee's expression hardened. We keep moving. The closer we get to the nexus, the stronger the ring will become. And so will you? Elena nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. She didn't fully understand what she was up against, but one thing was clear. She couldn't afford to fail. As the ship sped toward the unknown, a sense of unease settled over her. Somewhere out there, the Syndicate was regrouping and other factions were undoubtedly closing in. The ring pulsed softly as if reassuring her. For better or worse, she was no longer just Elena Carter. She was the Keeper. And the galaxy's fate now rested on her shoulders. The air inside the ancient chamber was electric, the hum of unseen energy vibrating in Elena's bones. At the heart of the massive cavern stood the Nexus itself, a shimmering ethereal sphere suspended in midair, pulsating with colors she'd never seen before. The light it cast was otherworldly, illuminating the carvings on the walls that depicted stories of cosmic battles, rising empires and civilizations long gone. Elena's gaze was fixed on the Nexus, her heart pounding in her chest. Every instinct told her to move closer, to touch it, to finish what she had started. But a low rumble from behind reminded her that she wasn't alone. Do you truly think you can claim it for yourself, human? A cold, guttural voice echoed through the chamber. Elena turned, her breath catching as Varric, the Syndicate's warlord, stepped out of the shadows. His towering form was encased in glimmering armor, each piece etched with alien symbols that radiated menace. Behind him, A squad of Syndicate soldiers fanned out, their weapons trained on her and Kaylee's. Kaylee's, standing at Elena's side, tightened his grip on his plasma blade. "Varric," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "I should have known you'd come crawling after us." Varric sneered, his red eyes narrowing. "Did you really think you could outrun me, Kaylee's? The Nexus doesn't belong to her." He pointed a clawed finger at Elena, disdain dripping from his words. "It belongs to the galaxy. And I will ensure it is wielded by someone worthy." Elena's hand instinctively went to the ring, its warmth reassuring her. "If you're so worthy, why haven't you claimed it yourself?" she shot back, her voice steady despite the fear twisting in her stomach. Varric's lips curled into a sinister smile. "The Nexus chooses its keeper. But choice can be overridden." He raised a device in his hand, a jagged contraption that pulsed with a sickly green light. "Your bond to the ring is fragile, human. Let me help you sever it." Before she could respond, the room erupted into chaos. Varric's soldiers opened fire, their weapons sending bolts of energy streaking through the air. Kaylee's moved like a blur, his blade deflecting the shots with precision as he charged at the nearest group. "Elena, get to the Nexus," Kaylee shouted over the noise. Her legs moved before her mind caught up, propelling her toward the glowing sphere. But Varric was faster, blocking her path with a swipe of his massive arm. "Not so fast," he snarled, his voice a low rumble. Elena ducked under his swing, adrenaline surging through her veins. She rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding another strike, and scrambled to her feet. The ring pulsed on her finger, its glow intensifying. "Come on," she muttered, her breath ragged. "Help me out here." As if in response, the ring flared to life. A shield of light erupted around her, deflecting Varric's next attack and sending him stumbling back. "You think that will save you?" Varric hissed, his voice filled with contempt. Elena didn't answer. She didn't have time to. The Nexus was within reach, its energy pulling at her like a magnet. She stepped closer, her hand outstretched, but a sudden explosion rocked the chamber, throwing her to the ground. Kaylee shouted her name, his voice barely audible over the din. She looked up to see Varric advancing on her again, his device glowing brighter. "Enough games," he growled. "You're not leaving here alive." Elena's mind raced. She couldn't let him win. Not when they were so close. She focused on the ring, willing it to respond. A surge of power coursed through her, and the symbols on the ring shifted, rearranging themselves into a new pattern. She felt the energy flow into her, filling her with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Varric lunged at her, but this time she was ready. A blast of light erupted from her hand, sending him crashing into the wall. His soldiers hesitated, their confidence faltering as they watched their leader struggle to rise. "Elena." Kaylee's voice cut through the chaos. "You need to bond with the Nexus now. It's the only way to stop him." She turned back to the sphere, her heart hammering in her chest. The energy it radiated was almost overwhelming, but she didn't have a choice. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward and pressed her hand to its surface. The moment her skin made contact, the world around her dissolved into light. Images flooded her mind, stars being born, galaxies colliding, civilizations rising and falling. She felt the weight of the Nexus's power, its vastness stretching beyond comprehension. "Elena," a voice echoed in her mind, ancient and resonant. "You are the keeper. The balance of the galaxy rests in your hands." She didn't have time to process the words. The connection was complete, and the energy of the Nexus surged through her, weaving itself into her very being. When the light faded, she stood taller, her eyes glowing with the same ethereal light as the Nexus. The ring on her finger was no longer just a ring, it was a part of her now. Varric staggered to his feet, his eyes wide with shock. "No. This can't be." Elena raised her hand, the power of the Nexus swirling around her. "It's over, Varric." He roared in defiance, charging at her one last time. But with a wave of her hand, she sent a pulse of energy through the chamber, disarming his soldiers and bringing him to his knees. Kaylee's approached her cautiously, his expression a mix of awe and relief. "You did it," he said softly. Elena nodded, her gaze fixed on Varric. It's not over yet. The Nexus chose me, but now I have to protect it. And that means keeping it out of the hands of people like him? Varric glared at her, his defiance unwavering. This isn't the end, Keeper. You can't stop what's coming. Elena's eyes hardened. We'll see about that. As she and Kayleigh prepared to leave, the Nexus pulsed softly, its light dimming slightly. The battle was won, but the war was just beginning. The aftermath was a haunting silence, broken only by the faint hum of the Nexus, now steady and calm. Elena stood in the heart of the chamber, the glowing ring on her finger dimming as the energy of the Nexus stabilized. Her breaths were shallow, her body aching from the battle, but her mind was sharper than it had ever been. The Nexus had chosen her, but what came next? The weight of the responsibility pressed down on her like the gravity of a dying star. Kayleigh approached her slowly, his plasma blade sheathed, his expression unreadable. You did it, he said, his voice low, yet filled with admiration. But you understand, don't you? This is just the beginning. Elena turned to face him, her gaze steady. I know, she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil churning inside her. The Syndicate won't stop. Others will come. They'll all want this power. She gestured toward the Nexus, its light pulsating faintly like a giant heartbeat. Kayleigh nodded solemnly. And that's why we must decide what to do with it. The Nexus can bring balance, but in the wrong hands, it could unravel the galaxy. Elena's eyes drifted to Varric, who was bound and unconscious, his massive frame slumped against the cavern wall. His soldiers had fled after her final blast of power, leaving him behind like a broken relic of his own ambitions. What about him? She asked, her tone wary. Kayleigh sighed. He'll answer for his crimes. The Galactic Council will make sure of that. For a moment, the two stood in silence, the enormity of their situation weighing heavily between them. Finally, Elena broke the stillness. So what happens to the Nexus? She asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Kayleigh tilted his head, his golden eyes narrowing thoughtfully. That's your choice now. You are its keeper. But be warned, choosing to wield its power will tie you to it forever. There's no turning back. Elena's fingers brushed the surface of the ring, its warmth radiating into her skin. She closed her eyes, letting the Nexus's energy pulse through her mind. Images of the galaxy filled her thoughts. Worlds teeming with life, civilizations thriving in harmony, and the fragile balance that could so easily tip into chaos. I don't want this power, she admitted softly. I never asked for it. Kayleigh placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding. Few do. But the Nexus chose you for a reason. You have a choice now, keep it safe or let it go. Her eyes opened, determination flickering within them. Let it go where? Kayleigh gestured to the carvings on the chamber walls. The Nexus was hidden here for eons before anyone discovered it. We can seal it away again somewhere no one will ever find it. But you'll have to sever your bond with it first. Elena hesitated, the thought of releasing such power both a relief and a loss. The Nexus had given her strength, but it had also burdened her with a responsibility she never wanted. How do I sever it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kayleigh stepped toward the Nexus, pulling a small ancient device from his belt. It looked like a crystalline key, its surface etched with the same symbols as the ring. Place your hand on the Nexus again. The device will transfer its energy, sealing it away until the next keeper is chosen. If that day ever comes. Elena's heart pounded as she approached the Nexus. The sphere's light seemed to brighten as she neared, as if it were alive, responding to her presence. She hesitated, her hand hovering just above its surface. What if I'm wrong? She asked, her voice trembling. What if the galaxy needs this power? Kayleigh stepped beside her, his gaze steady. The galaxy doesn't need power, Elena. It needs balance. The Nexus isn't the answer to everything, it's a tool. And tools can be dangerous in the wrong hands. She swallowed hard, nodding. Okay, let's do this. Her fingers brushed the Nexus, and the world around her dissolved into light once more. This time the energy was softer, less overwhelming. The voice of the Nexus resonated in her mind. Are you certain, Keeper? It asked. Once the bond is broken, your path will be your own, but the Nexus will no longer guide you. I'm certain, she replied, her voice firm. The galaxy deserves a chance to stand on its own. The light intensified, and Elena felt the bond severing, the connection slipping away like sand through her fingers. When the light faded, the Nexus's glow was dim, its energy locked away. The ring on her finger was cold, its symbols inert. Kaylee's caught her as she stumbled, her body weakened from the transfer. It's done, he said, a note of finality in his voice. She nodded, her gaze lingering on the now dormant Nexus. It's done? Epilogue. The cavern was silent as Elena and Kaylee stood on the surface of the planet, the twin suns casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. Behind them, the chamber's entrance was sealed, hidden once more from the eyes of the galaxy. What now? Elena asked, her voice quiet but steady. Kaylee smiled faintly. Now we find a way to rebuild. The galaxy needs people like you, Elena, people who care about more than just power. She chuckled softly, exhaustion evident in her tone. I was just a history teacher a few weeks ago. Now I'm, what? A galactic hero? Kaylee smirked. Something like that. As they boarded the ship, Elena cast one last glance at the horizon. The Nexus was safe, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt free. The galaxy might still be filled with chaos and danger, but she had made her choice. And for now that was enough.